How is everybody tonight? I have you all to myself. It's exciting. Thank you guys for continuing to come out. I know I've heard from a lot of you over the past few weeks. Some of you've kind of sent testimonies or things that God has spoken through you through this series that Kevin and I have been doing. And tonight we're going to talk about something kind of near and dear to my heart, because this is kind of where, as a counselor, I sit kind of in my pocket. Because when people come to counseling, a lot of times it's because they have a lot of unhealthy relationships. And a lot of those unhealthy relationships in life kind of have to deal with poor boundaries. So we're going to talk about boundaries tonight. But first, I'm going to tell you, I had a little crisis of my own, a little boundary crisis today. Because today, all the teachers are back to school. Kids don't come till next week, but teachers are back to school, so we've been doing professional development, all kinds of things to get ready for the kids next year. But every year, before the kids come back, my principal always does a mystery, fun activity, team building activity, but it's always a secret. He will never tell us what it is. And I mean, I have tried to break him over the last 7 or 8 years, and he has never cracked once. Like last year, it was so secret, he didn't even tell the assistant principal. She had no idea. But I think he knows she's easier to crack, so if he tells her, some of us may be able to get in there to do that. But I do not like surprises. If you are a person that's ever had any kind of trauma in your life, surprises are not fun, usually not a good thing, even if you know the event is supposed to be fun. But there's a difference between spontaneous fun and forced fun. And so this activity is always a little bit of forced fun. Typically, it's a great time. My administrator does a great job at planning these activities. But I will have to say, in the 7 or 8 years we've been doing them, I have nearly lost my life twice. Like, I'm not being dramatic. Like, nearly in a head-on collision, like, some of these are dangerous. So today's the day that I know that we're doing this activity. I do not know what we're doing. And here's my boundary dilemma. I don't know if what we're doing is something that I'm going to feel comfortable with. And if I'm not comfortable with it, am I going to feel like I can say no? Because this is a group activity, it's a building activity. Usually they're competitive, other people are counting on you. It's kind of expected, even though I can't say that we're like, no one's holding a gun to our head to participate. It's expected that everybody dives in and participates. So in my mind, I know that this is today, and I am in the shower, and I am getting ready, and I'm thinking, like, what could this be? Is this going to be something I'm going to be okay with? What if I want or need to say no? And so I take my shower, I get out, and I'm getting dressed. And I was so preoccupied with this that as I'm putting my clothes on, I realized that I only shaved one leg this morning. So tonight, I am doing this teaching with one hairy leg and one that is not hairy. So just kind of keep that in mind. So even though I may talk about boundaries, and I will help people with other people with boundaries, I have boundary issues too, and I can get in my own head about things sometimes. So what is a boundary? A boundary is really something that just tells where your property begins and ends, right? If we think about it as a field or as a yard, we usually have fences around those yards, right? That tells kind of where our property line is. And usually we're legally responsible for what happens on our property, right? So in the spiritual world, we have boundaries too. In the emotional world, they're just harder to see. So boundaries define us. They tell what's me and what's not me, shows where I begin and someone else begins. And I'm supposed to have a sense of ownership in what belongs to me. So if you were to think about some sort of a situation where, let's just say I had some property somewhere, and I said, Pastor Larry, I need you to guard and protect this property, and you're going to be responsible for anything that happens to my property while I'm gone. That's all I've told you. What questions would you have?
Do I defend it with my life?
How am I supposed to protect it? And then one other. Can you think of another question he should probably ask? Where is it? Where's the boundaries of the property? How do I know what it is I'm supposed to protect? This is what happens, because this can be really confusing. If we don't have clear boundaries, we can be really confused, and sometimes it can be dangerous. So this is what happens spiritually and emotionally when we aren't clear on what our boundaries are. So God designed us as a body, but we live within ourselves, right? We are contained. So inside this body is my mind, my will, and my emotions. And no one really knows what's inside here, truly, the unedited version, except me and God, right? I have a husband that I have been married to for 30 years, and he knows me well. 30 years, we know each other really well. But he doesn't, even Kevin doesn't really know the true unedited version of me because we filter things all the time. So we live within ourselves, but we are responsible for the things that make us us. So if we look at Proverbs 14:10, I like this verse. Every heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can fully share its joy. So again, we are the only ones that can know and experience what's inside. So to understand boundaries, we have to understand that we are responsible to others and for ourselves. And that's really important. So if we look at Galatians 6:2, I think they have that on the screen. It says, share each other's burdens, and in this way, obey the law of Christ. So this verse shows our responsibility to other people. So we are to share each other's burdens. So a lot of people that we know of, that I know of personally, are going through some really, 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 really big things right now. And those things are too big for them to carry alone. You know, when I think of these type of burdens, I'm thinking of tragedy, crisis, grief, major, huge life changes. And carrying those burdens, sharing those burdens, means that is something that person cannot do for themselves. They can't carry it by themselves. They're kind of like boulders, in a sense. If you think of it, can I carry a boulder all by myself? No, if I have to move that boulder, I'm going to need some of y'all to step up and help me with that. And then in Galatians 6:5, it says there, for each should carry their own load. So in one verse, he said, we need to share each other's burdens. And then over here, he said, we each need to carry our own load. So we've already talked about how burdens are like boulders. But in the verse where it talks about we're supposed to carry our own load, what a load is really referring to in that verse is our burdens of daily toil. Those are the things that we are responsible for. So it's kind of like our cargo, the things we put in our backpack, the things that we are personally responsible for. The problem we have is sometimes we have people that act like their boulder is a backpack and their backpack is a boulder. So the boulder people who try to act like it's a backpack, they won't ask for help. The people that want to act like their backpack is a boulder are people that are really irresponsible. Boundaries are not walls per se. If you think of a wall that just goes on and on and on and never ends, our boundaries need to have gates. Because the purpose of this is we got to let good stuff in, and we have to have a way to let the bad stuff out. You know, when we receive Christ, he comes in, right? But he'll only come in if we invite him. All right, he respects our boundaries. If I don't want him there, he's going to say, okay, I have to invite him. When we need to let things out, we confess like our sin and our pain. We confess that to him. That's us letting it out. Or maybe we talk to somebody, a trusted friend or a counselor. So those boundaries have gates. We're always letting things in and letting things out. The problem is when people let the bad stuff stay inside and they won't let any of the good things in. So God doesn't want us to wall ourselves off because he created us to live in a community, right? But within that community, each person has their own personal space, their own property. If you look at this from a spiritual perspective, that's kind of who God is. God lives in community with the Trinity, right? But he is his own distinct entity with his own distinct personality. He tells us what he likes, what he doesn't like. He tells us what he is responsible for. He tells us what he will allow and what he won't allow. He tells us who he is and who he isn't. God's love, he isn't darkness. He even tells us how to enter into his boundaries. If you think of 1 think it's Psalms 100, verse 4. It tells us to enter his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with, okay, thanksgiving and praise. What is that really? It's gratitude and words of affirmation. So he's telling us that that is the avenue with which to come into his secret place. Gratitude, words of affirmation. I think of that even with people. If we want to enter into somebody's gates, if we come in and meet that person with a posture of gratitude and words of affirmation, we're going to be able to enter into those gates and sometimes push past those people that are kind of keeping us walled off. So what are some types of boundaries? The first one that comes in mind, we kind of talked about how we are somebody that lives within ourselves. So our skin is a boundary, right? It holds in my bones, it holds in my blood, and it's designed to let the good stuff in, like food, and let the bad stuff out, like, well, you know. So when that boundary gets breached, that can be a problem. And when I was thinking about this, I immediately thought about what happened in our country and other countries during COVID. Because what did the government tell us that we had to do? Everybody had to get a vaccine of some sort. If you didn't comply, you might have been in jeopardy of losing your job. Some of you probably had jobs that you were told, if you don't do this, then you're going to have to hit the road, and we're going to replace that. That was kind of our government kind of seeing what we would do if we allowed them to push that boundary. And but that was telling us something we had to put into our skin, into our body, without our permission. Victims of sexual abuse are a great example of somebody that's had this boundary, physical and sexual abuse. This boundary's been breached. Because where does my body begin and where does it end? If somebody can physically hurt me, like, is my body mine? Does it belong to me? It's really important when teaching your kids, especially if you have young kids, teach them that it's okay to say no to an adult who wants a hug or wants a kiss if they're not comfortable. Because I'm guilty about that with my kids when they're little. Oh, give grandma a hug. You're going to hurt her feelings if you don't hug her. Teach them that they have the right to say no when they are physically uncomfortable. I had a little girl this school year that is a third grader, and you have to understand that the grade level that I work with primarily at school, they're second and third graders, so we're talking kids from age 7 to age 9, maybe 10. So these are fairly young kids, but I have had an increase, like a major increase in the number of kids that have been sexually violated. That's kids from your community right here, right now. Some of them have been big and made the news. Others of them are just much more quiet. And this young lady, mom had called me at the beginning of the school year and kind of let me know just an overview what had happened and said, she's probably going to need you. She's going to need to talk to you. So she was a little gal that I met with weekly, and she would talk about what had happened to her. But she had decided throughout all of this that, she didn't want to have boyfriends when she got older. She was only going to have girlfriends. And she kind of became more provocative as the year went on, but it was only with girls. So her boundaries got very, very, very skewed through her experience. Because a lot of times when people have had any kind of sexual abuse or trauma, later on in life, they'll either do one of two things. They'll become really promiscuous sometimes, or they will become very avoidant. If you guys know anything about my story, because some of you have heard me give my testimony before, you know that I am a child that experienced sexual abuse as a kid. And, God has healed me of that, and I've come so far from that day. But when Kevin and I got married, we were waiting for marriage. And so we dated for 3 years. That is a long time when you are waiting for marriage. I don't really recommend that. But circumstances of just long distance dating, and it is what it is. But we had been waiting. So when the wedding ceremony came, day of the wedding, it was green light, go. Kevin was like, green light. I was like, yellow light, caution. I was really comfortable up to then, you know, we hugged, kissed, held hands, did all the things that normal couples do. But I was okay with that because I knew it wasn't going to take me any further because we had set our boundaries. But now that that boundary was lifted and we were married, I was like, hey, I'm not so sure how I feel about this. And my poor husband, he probably got so many mixed messages during that first year of marriage because I probably said yes when I meant no and no when I meant yes. You know, I've got a headache, you know, all of those things. And then when I would say no, I would immediately regret it because I wanted that connection with him and I knew that that was important to our marriage. And then other times I would say yes when I meant no, like, let's just get this over with, you know. But I knew in my heart of hearts that that wasn't healthy and that was not good because in a marriage, you know, when it's green light go, my husband deserved somebody that was also in the green light zone. And so I had to really work on that because that is a healthy, important part of marriage. But sometimes and there are a lot of people that have had a lot of sexual trauma. I mean, our statistics are 1 in 3 women, sometime in their lifetime, will have an unwanted sexual encounter of some sort. That's how prevalent it is and how big of an issue this is. Another type of boundary, we talked about skin, time and distance. So when somebody is really pushing on you, trying to push past your boundaries and what you're comfortable with, sometimes getting some space and some geographical distance can help you set a boundary. Sometimes that's for safety, for personal safety. You need to move away from somebody that is trying to hurt you. But safety is also a consequence to somebody because you're not going to want to be in community with them if they are doing things that are hurtful to you. And that person may need to lose community with you for a while in order to respect your boundaries. Another boundary is other people. Sometimes we need people to buffer us, especially when we're not in a good place or we're weak. I always tell women if they are leaving like any kind of an abusive relationship to always have people. Don't just leave, don't just go somewhere, make sure that you have people to go to because you don't need to be alone, you know, if things don't go well or that person is coming after you and you feel like you're going to be unsafe. Another type of boundary are consequences. We kind of talked about that a little bit with time and distance. But, you know, if I were to go on somebody's property and they had a no trespassing sign, you know, and sometimes they'll say threat of prosecution. I know if I step onto somebody's property, I'm putting myself at risk to possibly, you know, they could call the sheriff and I could go to jail if I didn't get off their property. The Bible kind of gives us a lot of examples of what will happen, you know, if we do certain things. So if we walk this way, this is going to happen. If we walk this way, the Bible tells us this is going to happen. You know, if we set consequences with somebody, it might look, you know, for Kevin, Lori, if you buy any more toilet paper, I'm going to make you give me your debit card. But in bigger life circumstances, it might be, you know, you have a kid that's in their 20s and they are still living at home in the basement playing video games, and it might be, if you don't get a job, you're going to have to find another place to live. I had a family that I was doing counseling with before, and the husband really struggled with alcohol abuse, and it had affected the family greatly, and the wife was finally to the point where she said, either you go to rehab or the kids and I are leaving. And so he was like, but that's an ultimatum. Nobody likes ultimatums. Well, ultimatums have kind of a bad connotation, but I said, here's what you're really saying. I don't like boundaries. I don't like consequences of my actions, because if she didn't set that, you know, draw that line in the sand, he would keep doing what he had been doing this whole time, because she had been enabling that by making everything okay. And it wasn't until she drew a line in the sand and said, here's you know, the way it's going to be, did he go to rehab, and he finally got some help. So consequences are kind of like the barbs on the barbed wire. So they let us know that if you trespass, this is serious. When we help others escape their consequences, we're enablers. We're telling them it's okay to trespass. I see this all the time, guys, in kids at school. Lindsay could probably tell you the same thing. They have trouble accepting consequences because they don't think anything is ever their fault. And you know what? They have parents then that will intervene. If that kid loses recess or that kid, how dare you give my kid a consequence? And so kids are growing up feeling more and more and more and more empowered because they have the adults that are coming in trying to take all of those consequences away from them. And it's not healthy. The Bible has a really great consequence. He says, if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. I can tell you, hunger is a really good motivator. If I'm hungry, I will do a lot of things for food. Another boundary, this is probably the most important one, is your words. Words, just like we said, God tells us what he likes and doesn't like. Our words tell others what we like and what we don't like, what we will and won't tolerate. What's the most important boundary word? No. Yes and no. The problem is, sometimes we say yes when we mean no, or should say no, and sometimes we say no when we should say yes. Saying yes to things that we don't want to do can lead to a lot of resentment. Have you ever done something for somebody that you didn't really want to do, and then you were really kind of grumpy about it? I have. And some of you will let, somebody come in and maybe take 4 hours of your time that you didn't have 4 hours to give, but you will give it because they requested it, but you need somebody for 10 minutes and you'll never ask. Would anybody say they're kind of like that? I see you. So let's look at some different types of people that have trouble with yes and no. The first one we're going to call the compliant person. This is the person that will always say yes when they don't want to. They'll go along with anything. What do you want for dinner? I don't care. What do you want? Do you want to go hunting? If Kevin were to ask me to go hunting, sure, I'll go hunting. I don't want to go hunting. Do you want to, just fill in the blank? They'll always be like, yes, whatever you want to do. Yes, that's just fine. Do you want to run out in traffic naked? Yes. They'll say yes to anything. They're almost like a chameleon. They will do whatever anyone else is doing, kind of go along with it. They're the people you don't even really get to know, because they will just kind of blend into the woodwork and just go along with what everybody else is doing. Another one is the avoidant. These are the people that really need to say yes, but they're always saying no. These are the people that you can tell are struggling, you can tell they're hurting, you can tell that they need your help, but they're like, no, I got it. I don't want help. The other one is the controller. There's two types of controllers. These are the people that won't take no for an answer. Have you ever dealt with somebody like that in your life? Yeah, a telemarketer, they're a controller. They have a hard time taking no for an answer. And the people that are in stores now that are always pushing credit cards, and you tell them no, do they usually first take your first no? Nope, they will keep after you and keep after you, trying to convince you to sign up for a store credit card. We have the aggressive controllers. These are people that are the bulldozers. They will just bulldoze right over you. Sometimes these are the people that can be physically or emotionally abusive, but they're the people that do not like to hear the word no, and they are just going to railroad you until they get their way. Do you know what's probably the biggest aggressive controller out there? A 2 or a 3-year-old. They are tyrants. So what they will do is, if you tell them no, what? They yell, they scream, they have a fit, they hold their breath. And hopefully we can hold on and let them know that our no means no, but we are human. And sometimes we'll say, oh, for the love, just go ahead. Just go ahead. Just have that cookie. Just do that. Because we get exhausted from trying to hold the line. The problem with that is we create strong-willed kids that way. If we have wishy-washy boundaries with our kids, if no really means maybe and eventually yes, they're going to know that. They're going to know, okay, I pushed mom this far, I pushed dad this far, and they finally said yes. So they're going to know if you hold out that far, and they're going to go, okay, mom didn't say yes, but if I keep going a little bit further, I know I can break her. I know I can break dad, and get them to say yes to me. So, sometimes those little people can be just as big of a controller in our life as other adults can be. The other kind of controller is the manipulator. These are, the great manipulator was like in the Garden of Eden, when God set boundaries and said, hey, you can eat anything you want, just don't eat this fruit. So then the snake comes in, and Eve's like, hey, we can eat anything in this garden, except from this one tree. And the snake's like, but did God really say that? These are the people that will get you to second guess your boundaries. They'll kind of sometimes make you think like you're even crazy. And they might say things like, if you really loved me, you would X, Y, and Z. If you really cared about me. The manipulative controllers are also the silent treatment people. They will withhold themselves as a form of punishment if they don't get their way in a situation. Another type of person that has trouble with yes and no is the non-responsive person. So these are the people that they come in one or two packages. One package is they are the people that are just so self-absorbed. They are so into themselves that they're not responsive to the needs of anybody else. Sometimes they don't even notice. These are the people that are almost narcissistic in nature. And then there's those that I think are just really critical with themselves, and they have a lot of insecurity, and they have a lot of self-hatred, so they project that on other people. So they're like, I don't care about your needs, because they're projecting their own hate for themselves onto other people. So we kind of talked about boulders and backpacks. We talked about things that are boulders. Those are crisis things. So what is in our backpack? What are our burdens of daily toil that we're responsible for? The first one, we kind of talked about, these last couple of weeks, we talked about our thoughts. You can't always control what thought comes into your brain, but you can control what thought stays there. And we talked about our catch it, check it, change it on the very first week when we were talking about those intrusive thoughts, where the Bible talks about taking everything captive. We can also are responsible for our feelings. People will tell me all the time, well, I can't help the way I feel. Well, you can. And your thoughts and your feelings are connected, because where your thoughts go, your feelings will go. If you are dwelling on miserable thoughts, what kind of feelings are you going to have? Miserable feelings, right? They go hand in hand. My grandma always told me that you can just get glad in the same pants you got mad in. Have you ever had somebody tell you that? Yeah, because that's my responsibility. Sometimes we have people that will tell us, or we may have even said this, you make me so mad. Have you ever said that to somebody? You make me feel so angry. Nobody can make us feel anything. We choose it. Now, their behavior may cause a reaction in us where we have a certain feeling, but they're not responsible for our feelings. We are. Our attitudes and beliefs are something else that's in our backpack. Those are our convictions. Because sometimes there are things that I'm not okay with, but you may be comfortable with, or things I'm comfortable with that you may not be okay with. Our behaviors. So we're not responsible for other people's behavior, but we are responsible for ours. So I've had people that have come into counseling saying, well, the reason I acted that way is because you did this. If you hadn't have done that, then I wouldn't have acted this way. This is us trying to make our feelings and our behaviors somebody else's responsibility. You're the reason I did this. And so we are responsible for our own behaviors, right? If somebody acts that way, I choose then to be a fool about it, if I'm going to lose my mind over that. That was the stance I chose, our behaviors. Then the other one is our choices. I had a choice today whether I wanted to participate in forced fun. It didn't always feel like that, because sometimes we say, I don't have a choice. Sometimes we just don't like the two choices that we have, but we still have a choice. I would not have liked to say no to today's activities because I would have felt insecure, felt like other people I would have let somebody down. I don't like that choice, but I still had one. I still could have said yes or no. Our values are also in our backpack. What priority do we assign things? I really think, when I think about this, I think about like culturally, our priorities about church and things have really changed. Now, there's nothing biblical about being, that says we have to be in church on a Wednesday night. Nothing in Scripture that says we have to be here. But here you are because you value it and you think it's important. There was a day and time when no school would have dared have school activity on a Wednesday night. Like, that just was unheard of. They just wouldn't do it. But as we have come to value community during the week with other believers and value other people more, those boundaries have got shifted. You know, school and other entities have kind of pushed it and pushed it and pushed it to where there's like a million things that are going on a Wednesday night. So what do we value? What priority do we put on things? Our limits are also in our backpack. What we will and won't allow. What goes and what won't go with you. We decide that. Our resources and our gifts. You have money, you decide where it goes. You decide whether or not you're going to be a good steward with the things that you have. You decide whether you're going to tithe or whether you're not going to tithe. You decide whether you are going to spend all of your money on video games and other things, or whether you're going to spend your money on your rent. We're also responsible for our love. So a lot of people have trouble giving and receiving love because they've been hurt. But when we conceal love for others, that's love rejected, and it can hurt us. Because our physical heart needs an inflow and an outflow of blood, so does our spiritual heart. We need an inflow and outflow of love from other people, because when we wall ourselves off, that can be a really lonely place. And I've had a lot of really lonely people that have come in to counseling because they have not been able to ask for help in the past. And the minute they step into that counseling room is their very first time they've ever asked somebody for help. And the reason they haven't asked for help is because maybe they don't trust people. They want to keep people at a distance because people have disappointed them. But when they've put up those walls, they've also created isolation, loneliness, sometimes anxiety, fear. And they realized that the hurt and the pain that they have from walling people off is just as bad as if they had let people in. Relationships are important, but we need to have the right kind of boundaries. We need to have the right kind of perspective on our relationships, and we need to make sure that when we need help that we ask for it, but we also need to make sure that we are taking responsibility for the things that are within our backpack. I think I'm going to end there for tonight. I really appreciate a lot of you have sent in, like I said, some testimonies and things that God has spoken to you for this. I would encourage you to continue to do that as we go through the rest of the series, because we're going to really build off of tonight's teaching next week. And I don't do that because Kevin and I need to hear like words of affirmation or anything from you. I ask you to do that for you, because what this whole series is about is overcoming things that are distracting, things that are barriers for us to prepare the way. Because if we are so physically drained from relationships that are sucking the life out of us, or if we are in loneliness because we are not allowing other people to help us, we're going to be so weighed down with things that we don't have the time, energy, focus, resources that we need to prepare the way for His kingdom. And so one of the things I encourage you to do is give your testimony. When you hear something like this, let somebody know what God is doing for you through this, because in Revelation it tells us that we overcome through what? The blood of the Lamb and the word of your testimony. If there's something Pastor Larry preaches on Sunday and it just really hits you, let him know how that spoke to you. Again, he doesn't need like good jobs and that sort of thing, because what he teaches or what we're teaching is really to equip you to do the work of the ministry. Some of these things may not necessarily be for you personally, but we hope that we're also giving you tools that you can use to help somebody else, because we need to be each other's people. So somebody's going to come to you and that's struggling, and hopefully some of the things that we're talking about are going to help you to be able to help others. So that's all I have. Do you have something else, Pastor Larry?
Be back Sunday.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night.